So now I'm going to go to my iron and press these out, and we'll come back again and I'll show you the next step. I've pressed the 4 blocks, and you'll notice that they're very irregular around the outside, so we actually need to square these blocks off. Now I prefer to cut these one at a time. You can, if you want to, cut the 4 at the one time, but I want to actually line them up. And by using my ruler and by using the join lines, I can actually square that up on my ruler and then pick where I actually want to square them up. Now I've got a little bit of edge here, but I've got a lot more on this end of the fabric. Now I'm going to square mine up. I've got a 16-inch ruler, actually 16 and a half, and I'm going to mark it here at the 10 and also along this 10 line here, so that I know when I come to my other blocks, this is where I want to be on my ruler. So I'm just going to place that down, get my cutter, and I'm going to cut around that block. Now this fabric that we've cut from around the edge, we can actually then use for part of the borders, just to add a bit of interest to it. Now all I need to do now is just line up the corner and just cut the waste fabric off. Whoops. Hope if I was going in the right direction. There'll be just scraps of fabric. And I'm going to repeat that process to square up the other box. Okay, so I've cut the 4 squares out of my fabric. Now I need to place them in some form of order. Now the way I've placed them is that, so no 2 fabrics that are the same are together. Now to do that, you'll notice that I've got a long piece here, long piece, and a long piece here. Now by doing that from the centre, you'll notice that I've got 4 different fabrics here, 4 different fabrics here, and the same all the way around. So that was how I would place my blocks, so that I haven't got the same fabrics together. Now you can play around with them. If you wanted to, you could put that square block into the centre, but by doing that then you've extended this fabric here, and we really don't want that, so you may have to juggle them around until you find a way that they go together that provides you with a nice arrangement. So that's the one that I'm actually going to use. Now you can also select one of the colours and put your sashing in between like I did on the other one, but just for this one I'm just going to join them together. So I'm just going to join that one to that one, I'm going to flip it and join that one to that one and sew them together, and then when they're sewn together I'll flip those 2 on top of those 2 and sew along here, so that I'll have one complete square for the centre of my quilt. So I'll come back after I've done that. Okay, so I've sewn the 4 pieces together now, so I have one complete centre square. Now I need to decide what sort of a border. Now I normally put a narrow border to frame my centre block. Now you have a couple of options. If you want something to really stand out as a border, then you could use something like that. If you want something to blend in as a border, so we've got that one. So what I'll do is I'll just pull this back a little bit so you can see you have that one. Then because I've actually got some excess fabric, then I would use that one with some combination of other fabrics to make my other border. If I want to have it more neutral colours, then I would take that one out and place these as my borders. So I'm actually going to go with that. I'm not going to go with the darker one. So I'm going to cut some strips of that. Now I'd normally cut the strips either 2 or 2.5 inches wide, and then I will go on, depending on what fabrics I've got, what scraps and how wide they are will determine how wide I make that other border. So to start with, I'm going to cut these into 2.5-inch strips, and that will put my border around the edge. Now you can see that I've actually added the border around the edge of my quilt, and that goes all the way around. Now you can determine whether you want to have long strips or short strips at the top and the long strips down the side, etc. I prefer to actually use the start area here and extend along the side of the quilt so that it is a long area there, and then start again down that side. That tends to work out better as far as the width of the fabric when I'm only doing lap-sized quilts. Now you'll notice that I had some scraps of fabric left over, and these are what I'm going to use for that outside border. I've also got another fat quarter, the same fabric, and I'm going to use that for the corner pieces, the longest pieces. So I'm just going to cut this up into 3.5-inch strips, and I'll get back to you. Now, using my various scraps of fabric that were there, I've now cut some pieces. Now they're 3.5 inches wide, and I've made them varying between 2 and 2.5 inches, and I've made sure that I've got 4 rows exactly the same, and they are going to form the center edge squares. So I'm going to sew those all together in rows using a 1/4 inch seam. Now it will depend on how much fabric you had left on how you do the fill-in stripes for the border. I varied my length, as I said, some were 2, some were 2.5. I've also added in some plain fabric just to make up those different lengths, and then I added the more patterned fabric for the corner areas. So I can't really advise you on quantities because it will depend on what fabrics you've got in your stock, whether you bought meterage or yardage for your fat quarters. But this just gives you some idea what you can do around the border. Now I'm going to sew this border on, and I'll get back to you shortly. Well, I've put my border on my quilt, as you can see. Now all that's left is to actually put the quilt together. I hope you've had fun learning this technique, and I will be doing some more using the different method of diagonal slashing, etc. Thank you for watching my DVD.